All right, good Sunday morning, everybody. I'm meteorologist Tim Pandages here with KHOU 11, talking about tropical weather. And I hope you've enjoyed the quiet, nice weather so far this weekend, because things are about to change as we transition to a very wet pattern, all thanks to the incoming tropical storm Nicholas that's tracking in our general direction. So here's the latest. If you're just hearing about this just about an hour ago, Hurricane Center upgraded Invest 94L, and that was that tropical wave that we've been watching for the past couple days in the southern Gulf of Mexico, the Bay of Campeche. Still generally in that same area, moving very slowly, but it is very, very large. It has transitioned to Tropical Storm Nicholas, the 14th named storm of the season. Hurricane hunters flew out into the storm for its first mission into Invest 94L earlier this morning out of Keesler Air Force Base, the Hurricane Hunter aircraft with the Air Force Reserve. They found a closed circulation, and they also found winds accompanying that closed circulation of tropical storm force. So those are winds of 39 miles per hour or greater. So right now it's tagged as 40 mile per hour tropical storm Nicholas. Now those tropical storm force winds extend out a good amount, not terribly large wind field yet because it's still in its organizing stages, but its moisture shield is massive. When you see it on satellite imagery, it takes up pretty much all of the western Gulf of Mexico, extending up to the Gulf Coast, all the way down to the Bay of Campeche. It's very massive and a slow mover, and that's why it's going to be a heavy rain and flood threat through all of southeast Texas, all the way up into Louisiana as it inches its way northwards for the next couple of days. So here's our storm list so far. We've cleared out 2 rows now, ending it with Nicholas, the 14th named storm of the 2021 season. And here it is, the first forecast track for Tropical Storm Nicholas. And this has Houston, all of the southeast Texas coastline into Louisiana in that cone of uncertainty. First, let's address why it's called the cone of uncertainty. Now, the center of the storm is expected to stay within that cone 2/3 of the time. So this is not set in stone. It can stray anywhere east or west, pretty narrow early on because the model consensus is quite tight. But as we get farther out in time and as the steering that's going to drive the storm breaks down, you see this big bulb here at the end of the cone, and that's because there is large uncertainty with weak steering of where it will wobble. But I also want to point out here that this cone takes it right through Houston as a higher end tropical storm as it's still over the open waters and then moves over land. Once it's away from its fuel source, the strengthening process will cease. However, there's still a ton of tropical moisture associated with it, and with its slow track northwards, it's going to bring over a foot of rain in many, many locations. You can see how slow that track is. We're here at Tuesday at 7 in the morning, and by Thursday at 7 in the morning, 2 days later, we're barely inland. So it's got a very long-term effect here likely on this area as it builds northwards and eventually falls apart there by Friday morning. So a long duration, very rainy event. Not so much of a wind threat for a lot of areas, but the rain and the flooding. It is helpful that over the past couple of weeks we've been rather dry here in southeast Texas. Bayous are running quite low, so early on we'll be able to absorb some of that heavier rainfall. But since it will be so persistent, that rain will pile on up, the ground becomes saturated, and we start to see some flooding issues, especially in areas with a lot of impervious surfaces, cities, highways, things like that. We'll see that water pile up a lot faster and overwhelm the drainage basins. We have watches that are up through much of the southeast Texas coastline. This yellow here is a tropical storm watch, and that means that tropical storm conditions, winds in excess of 39 miles per hour, are expected or possible within 24 to 48 hours. As we get closer, this will likely be upgraded to a tropical storm warning. On top of that, with its forecast track currently, that does bring onshore winds for a long duration of time, piling in the water along low-lying areas. So despite it not being a particularly strong storm, it's still going to pile up the water along the coastline there with storm surge, and the potential is there for 2 to 4 feet of storm surge inundation. So keep that in mind. Galveston over to Chambers, southern Matagorda, and Brazoria as well, seeing those storm surge watches that are up. Just for an FYI for all of you, if you're checking back on the latest updates in terms of the latest advisories from the Hurricane Center, now that we've got the first advisory that came out at 10 a.m. with the forecast cone, we'll get the next one at 1 in the afternoon. This is an intermediate advisory, so it's not going to be any change to the forecast track. It'll give us an intensity update and its current location. The next forecast cone change, if any are necessary, comes our way at 4 p.m. and then again at 10 p.m. So we get 8 updates, 4 full advisories and 4 intermediate every single day. And as we get closer to landfall, they like to upgrade that to around every hour getting updates. We saw that with Ida, hourly advisories there. Here's how it looks on satellite imagery. And remember what I said? It's just huge. The center is located down here. And that's also another thing that the hurricane hunters, they had 2 basic mission goals. One was to determine a closed circulation, warranting the upgrade to a tropical storm, but also to find out exactly where the center of the storm was, because until now we were just using satellite estimates, and the models were playing a guessing game on exactly where it was located. So now this verifying that the center is a little bit farther towards the west does give us a scenario that it may go closer to the coastline and, in fact, follow the European solution that I'm going to show you in a second, rather than the GFS. Both are still fair game and can certainly occur, but it looks like it would be leaning more towards the European, which would be a heavier rainfall event for us here in southeast Texas. But a very large moisture shield, the top northernmost bands, at least of the cloud cover, are making it all the way towards the southeast Texas coastline, stretching all the way up to Louisiana and all the way down to the Bay of Campeche, so taking up the majority of the western Gulf of Mexico. Just to give you a brief summary here of the Hurricane Hunter aircraft that flew into it, they're actually still in the storm, sampling the winds and the pressure gradients to determine where that storm will be moving. And it's very helpful because all that data they're collecting will be ingested into the computer models that'll give us new runs this afternoon that'll have the most up-to-date, most accurate data to give us a more precise track going forward from here. On visible satellite imagery, you can still see, again, the very pronounced size of the storm, and you can make out some bubbling up of some cumulus clouds, some thunderstorm activity, some cumulonimbus there flaring on up on the north side, as we are seeing a signal that it's strengthening and gaining organization as it builds to the north. And it's got a pretty conducive environment to do so. The environmental profile, in fact, from the surface north, we've got moist air in place, no dry air really around. Wind shear is relaxing. And we've also got very warm sea surface temperatures. The western Gulf has been untouched by any tropical system so far this season. Most of the activity has been in the eastern Gulf. And even there, sea surface temperatures are still very warm. So now let's break down the modeling of these things. We have 2 global models we look at. You've heard of these before, I'm sure, if you follow weather, GFS and the European. Now, there are 2 scenarios here. Both show it strengthening and building north and northeast. The same overall trend is there, but the exact location, which will have big implications on the types of impacts we see here in southeast Texas, do vary greatly. So the GFS does point to a stronger storm because it keeps it over the water longer. Its fuel source is persistent. The European over water for like the next 24 hours or so, and then it builds inland just south of Brownsville, Texas. The moment that center gets over land, it's cut off from its fuel source. So it's going to build inland close to the coast, but just far enough inland, and move on a track to the west of Houston. And that means that we're going to see plumes of tropical moisture coming in off the Gulf of Mexico. And with its slow movement, those bands of heavy rain will be training over the same areas, dropping 2 to 3 inches, maybe more, per hour. That's the type of rainfall we're looking at here as this builds inland, if in fact the European model does verify. The GFS would spare us the heaviest rain, keeping that offshore, but that would present more of a wind and tidal surge issue, especially for our coastal communities there. So either way, we're looking at impacts here. Some of us will see heavier rain, some of us wind, depending on the verified track. So I want to show you a close-up view in terms of a European track. That's the line here moving inland. Watch the forecast rainfall from the European model with that track. I mean, we've got bullseyes, multiple bullseyes here of anywhere from 10 to 20 inches of rain. That seems excessively high, right? But it's slow moving, and there is a lot of moisture in the atmosphere that will be wrung out like a sponge. So it's possible, although this is not set in stone, a jog of this track a little bit farther, 10, 20 miles to the southeast, would push a lot of this heavier rain out over the Gulf of Mexico, and that's what we'd want to see. Now, on the contrary here, we've got the GFS. That's the forecast track, at least of the last run of the GFS, keeping it along the coast just offshore of Galveston, and then maybe making it inland into Louisiana. This would be a stronger storm. I wouldn't be surprised if it peaks at a hurricane, with it being over the very warm waters there and low wind shear and weak steering. But look at the difference in terms of the rainfall totals. It spares most of southeast Texas excessive rainfall, still a couple of inches, especially along the immediate coastline, but that heavy rain threat then spreads all the way up into Louisiana, just to the north of the track there as it moves inland. Let's time it out for you now here on Future Track, because I think we start to see some tropical downpours and shower activity developing as early as this evening. I don't think it's very widespread, and most of it isolated to the south along the coast. As we move into tomorrow, that rain expands a little bit more. I think it may be heavy at times, but not constantly downpouring at all. We'll have rain on and off through the afternoon hours, and then modeling is indicating that we see a little break Tuesday morning. So Tuesday morning's commute may be all right. Still some rain around, but I don't think flooding will be a problem at that point in time. By Tuesday afternoon, here we are at 5 p.m., the Tuesday ride home from work and school. You see the bright colors on the modeling here, the yellows, the oranges. This is like looking at radar and the heavy rain. That's what's happening here. That's building on in, and notice it's just funneling in off the Gulf of Mexico. So we went from 5 o'clock to 2 in the morning on Wednesday. So that's 9 hours here that we are seeing rainfall rates potentially 2 to 3 inches per hour with some of these brighter colors here, right over Fort Bend in Harris County, areas that don't handle a lot of water very well. Fast forward to Wednesday morning's commute, 8:30. Not much change on the modeling. Still raining cats and dogs over the areas we don't want to see the heaviest rain falling. Harris County, Fort Bend, as you get over towards Liberty, Beaumont area too. And then finally, by Wednesday evening's commute, we'll start to see things quiet down a bit, at least with this computer model run, off to the west of the city. The heavier rain begins building eastwards into Louisiana and Beaumont, and then things start to wind down by Thursday. So you see what I mean here when we're saying a long duration event. Rain showers coming into the picture tonight, and then picking up in intensity and not really tapering off until we get to Thursday. So think about the amount of rain we could pick up within that amount of time. Now, the positive is that it's not all at once. We're not going to see like 12, 20 inches of rain in 24 hours. This will be spread out, but still, that much rain coming down 2 to 3 inches an hour in some of these bursts could certainly cause some problems. So, Weather Prediction Center says, we've been dry. Bayou river levels are running a little bit low. That's good for now. But with the rain kind of coming on in and building in, ground eventually getting saturated, the threat is still there for flooding. So a slight risk for Monday and then into Tuesday as well. And then that even begins to spread into Louisiana too. So the flood threat is certainly there, and that is going to be the main impact from Tropical Storm Nicholas, at least in our area. So let's time it out for you now. And this is going to vary a little bit based on the track, so I'll explain what I mean here. So we've got the heavy rain threat pretty much for everybody, but again, if it follows a GFS track, most of this will be isolated along the immediate coastlines. I think the heaviest of the rain, as it looks right now, will be during the day on Monday, moderate, maybe some heavy at times rain showers. Things quiet down overnight Monday into Tuesday morning, and then by Tuesday midday, it starts to ramp up, and that's when the heaviest of the rain and the flooding potential builds on in here through Wednesday evening. So with that being said, the flooding threat, early on, I think the ground's able to handle some of this rain, so we'll absorb it well, but we get saturated quickly, and the flood threat ticks upwards Tuesday into Wednesday. Now, say it does favor a GFS track, will lower the rainfall totals, but increase the tidal flooding potential as well as the winds, because if the GFS verifies, it does have it off the coast over the water longer, so it would be a stronger system, stronger winds, and coastal areas could see some gustier winds as a result of that. If the European verifies its farther inland, wind threat will not really be an issue. It'll mainly just be overall very, very heavy rain. So here's also what to expect in terms of the winds, gusty near the coast, high risk for flooding, not expecting any severe weather in terms of tornadoes as things look right now. It will be a slow-moving, long-duration event with these rainfall totals inland 4 to 8. Coastal areas could have 8 to 12, if not more than that. All right, let's talk about it on the global models once again. This is kind of a different way, a different perspective to view these. What you're looking at here is a comparison of the GFS and the European models. These lines are isobars, lines of equal pressure. When they're really tightly packed together, that's a strong storm with very strong gusty winds because it's got a strong pressure gradient. The pressure changes drastically over a short amount of distance. Right here, this is starting things off this morning at 11 a.m. GFS and European, which, by the way, the GFS is the yellow and the red is the European model, pretty much right on top of each other, showing a closed low like the Hurricane Hunter aircraft found. And then as we progress through time, here we go towards tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. It's moving pretty far to the north at this point, still to the southeast of Brownsville, Texas. The European model closer to the coastline, like we've been seeing as a trend, a little bit weaker. GFS a little farther away from the coast over the open, deeper, warmer waters of the western Gulf of Mexico as a little bit of a stronger storm. Now we get into tomorrow night at 9 p.m. And GFS, you can see really strengthening this. The isobars are tightly packed. It's a stronger system, gustier winds, maybe, potentially a high-end tropical storm, maybe a Category 1 hurricane. I would not be surprised if this does pop to a Category 1 hurricane status because of the very warm ocean waters and the overall upper atmosphere pattern that would favor that intensification, especially over the next 36 hours or so, based on already the intensification we've seen throughout the day today. It looks much healthier than it did just yesterday. Now the European model here, much weaker. It's closer to the coastline, perhaps over land at this point, already starting to fall apart, but still consisting of all that rich tropical moisture. Here we are by Tuesday at lunchtime. GFS has a pretty potent storm here. May it be a tropical storm or a hurricane at this point, still over the open waters just south of Galveston. At this point in time is when we start to look at really the impacts of storm surge. Because if it's southeast of Galveston, we've got the winds coming in onshore, blowing the waters into Galveston Bay. And that will pile up. That's why that storm surge watch is up for the potential of 2 to 4 feet of storm surge inundation. Now we've got the European, very broad circulation here indicating it's over land and it's not nearly as strong as what the GFS is indicating. Going a little farther out in time, the GFS, again, skirting the coast of Texas, moving inland potentially near Lake Charles as we get into the day on Wednesday morning. And then we've got the European model lagging behind, so tapping into a very weak steering and sitting pretty much in the same general area, playing it right out through the rest of the week. Here we're at the 16th, 6 p.m., and it's just sitting over southeast Texas, raining itself out. So the European is pointing to higher rainfall totals. GFS a little bit faster, stronger, and keeping the heaviest rain to our east and offshore. Here's how all the other spaghetti models are seeing things. Each line here is either an ensemble member. What I have on here is the GFS ensemble. And what that is the GFS model run several different times, tweaking the variables slightly to see if there's any different outcome. So we've got a bunch of those in here that are all very consistent with this track, and then all the other tropical models thrown in there as well. So they're not all honing in on one spot, but it's also not spread out over 1,000 miles that we've seen from other storms. So this track is pretty much set going north. Exactly where it turns to the northeast is going to be the determining factor of if it's a stronger system or weaker with just a ton of rain in southeast Texas. Now, as I've talked about those warm ocean waters, you can tell the difference between the east and western portions of the Gulf of Mexico. Several storms have gone through here in the past couple weeks, and sea surface temperatures are slightly lower. Mid-80s, you only need 80 degrees or warmer to sustain tropical activity. We still have that despite all the energy that's been pulled out of those warm ocean waters. But here in the western Gulf, untapped. And a lot of this warm water extends down to a depth. The ocean heat content is rather high. So even with a slow-moving system, which, by the way, if we go back in time to Larry was a major hurricane for 4 days, but it was such a slow mover, it kind of plateaued because it was doing something called upwelling. It was mixing up the ocean waters. And despite it being over very deep warm waters, since it was moving so slow, it eventually kicked up cooler waters. That could happen here, but we'll see what happens if that does occur. It will start to move to the north over the warm waters, upwell the waters and mix up some of that cooler water from the depths if in fact it is moving really slowly while it's over the water, and then move inland. But nonetheless, plenty of energy to tap into here. We just got to the peak of the season 2 days ago on September 10th. So Nicholas is not the only game in town. In fact, there are 4 other tropical waves that we are watching, none of which, I'm happy to report at least right now, are a threat to any land, nonetheless the United States. We'll have to keep an eye on this one here off the southeast coast, potentially developing within the next 5 days at 50%, but a couple more waves off the coast of Africa that could potentially see some development odds going up in the coming days as well. All right, we here at KHOU 11 are here for you throughout this entire storm. We're going to post a lot of updates to keep you up to date on the latest information on what's going on with Nicholas and how it will impact our area. The newest model data, when it comes out, you will know about it as well. If you have any questions, check out what we're posting on social media as well. You can find me on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook. We'll see you a little bit later with the latest update.